Oh, hello. Welcome everyone. I'm Catfish Franklin and this here is Catfish Corner. And today's story, well, it's not a song. It's a place and a person. It is the grave of famed outlaw Frank James. But before I get into all that, I would like to thank everyone here on YouTube. Gosh, thanks everyone who's been checking out the videos, and seems like everyone's been having fun, so that's really a nice thing. And that goes double for my people on Patreon over there. Gosh, thanks a lot, everybody. Nice group of people. Proud to know y'all. Now then, the story of Frank James's grave. Well, I just went there and I thought that you folks would like to see it. It's pretty interesting. So, Frank James, of course, ties in with what we do here on the channel because of the infamous ballad of Jesse James, which is one of the main songs in the canon. And it's a great song. But no one ever talks about Frank James that much, Jesse's older brother. So there's a lot that kind of go through with this, so I've made some notes just so I don't make any mistakes. And this isn't really, I mean, I try to be as accurate as I can with all facts, but I just want to give you a sense of who Frank James was before we check out his gravesite. So, here, I've got my list here. Now, Frank James, born 1843. So in 1861 comes along, the Civil War starts. Frank immediately joins up with the Confederate bushwhackers and is involved in some pretty brutal stuff all throughout the war. I mean, about as brutal as it gets. Frank James and those guerrillas were in the middle of all that nasty business. For example, Frank was known to have participated in the raid on Lawrence, Kansas, which was a giant massacre. He's also known to have been with the guerrilla band that, and Jesse was on this one too, where they killed a bunch of unarmed Union soldiers who were returning home and mutilated them very badly. Pretty nasty. So he's doing that throughout the Civil War. Then the war ends, and him and Jesse and some of their guerrilla buddies, well, they don't feel like quitting. So they keep on going, and they go on as outlaws for a long time. And they had one of the best streaks of all time. Man, these guys were crazy. The main band, the James Younger Band, the one that was all the guerrilla dudes. But eventually, all those guys got captured or killed, except for Frank and Jesse. And in the end days, when Frank kind of dropped out of robbing, Jesse went on with a band of kind of just regular thieves, and those guys were not as good. And it would turn out to be that group of characters who would assassinate Jesse, which happened in 1882. And later on that year, Frank turned himself in at the Missouri State Capitol, threw his guns over, and turned himself in. By God, he did it. And he said, no one else has touched these guns since 1861, something like that. Or, I haven't let anyone else touch these guns since 1861. He threw them up on the thing, they say. And not only that, what's crazy is he was acquitted of all charges. And that's a whole story on its own, but he was acquitted and walked away a free man. So that's pretty rare right there. He's the only one. He was captured once in the beginning of the Civil War and released after he took the oath to the nation. But after that, and after Jesse joined the war later on, Frank was never captured again. He was injured a few times. Never captured. Amazing. Then he just walks into the Capitol and surrenders and goes to trial and everything, gets away with it. It's amazing. So, what did he do after that? Because he lived for another 33 years. Frank James lived until 1915. So what did he do after that? Well, he lived in Missouri, Kentucky, Texas. Some people say Oklahoma. Some people say Louisiana. He did all kinds of weird things. He was a shoe salesman in Dallas, Texas. He was a ticket taker for years in downtown St. Louis for a burlesque club. They even advertised it. Come have your ticket torn by famous outlaw Frank James. That's a true story. He and Cole Younger, his one of the buddies from the guerrillas, who was captured and thrown in jail, lived long enough to get back out of jail, and then him and Frank bought a Wild West show, and then they were putting on a Wild West show where they were basically just creating a giant parody of their former lives, all for spectacle. True story. And also, I think I have this one right. It said that he was a betting commissioner in New Orleans. But I think it was betting commissioner. I'm not as sure about that one, but those other ones are so true. And also, he did a deal of farming too. And of course, he ended up at the James Farm giving tours. But here's some interesting things about the grave site. Now, he is in Hill Park Cemetery. Hill Park is named after William Hill, was the son of Adam Hill, who bought that land in 1833. It was originally a 300-acre farm. Adam Hill was born in 1799. I just wanted to say that. That's so long ago in some ways. And so his son then, they lived there, and then in 1927, Adam's grandson, William's son, Joe Lyle, gave those 12 acres, including the family graveyard plot, to the city of Independence. 1927. So, why is Frank James buried there? Now, from what I've seen, his wife, he's buried with his wife, Ann Ralston, and it seems that Ann Ralston's mother is named Mary Catherine Hill. So it seems that Ann Ralston is part of this Hill family. That's not proof, but that's what it seems like. So that may explain why Frank James is buried there. But what's also interesting is that Frank, when he died, he was afraid of grave robbers because of everything that had gone on with Jesse's grave. And his people wanted to rob his grave, and people come into the house for tours, and they could buy stones off the grave. I mean, it was a very famous grave. So Frank, he didn't like the limelight like Jesse. So Jesse probably thinks that's pretty funny what's happened to his own grave. But but Frank wasn't into that. So when he died, he had himself cremated. And then this is another true story. He had his remains put into a safety deposit box until his wife, Ann Ralston, died. And then they would be buried together. And furthermore, on the grave, it doesn't say Frank James. His full name is Alexander Franklin, no relation, James. And on his tombstone, it says James at the top, and underneath it just says Alexander F. So this guy was clearly taking precautions to not have his grave robbed. Also, it's a rather inconspicuous place. You know, his wife's name isn't Hill, so it's not, especially back then, it probably would have been difficult to tie him to that place. Yeah, and it's strange. He's not buried with the rest of the James family, which you might think. Anyway, what else? I guess, I don't know, I could keep going on about a lot of things. The whole thing is super interesting to me, but I guess we better get on to the footage. So, I just want to say, to preface the footage, my good friend Bob Villain always says, there is no substitute for having your feet on the ground in a place. And he's right about that, I've learned. And so, even though this video is no substitute for really going to the grave, I did my best to show you what it's like to be there, to give you a feeling of being there, just like I've tried to create this feeling of who this Frank James character was, you know, because and one other thing I want to mention, you know, he wanted to get out of the business of outlawry. You know, Jesse was into it always, but Frank, he was so good at it, I guess, he just got bored or something. He didn't want to do it. He wanted to live the life of a peaceful citizen and not always have to be looking over his back and stuff like that. And it's also said he was a quiet character as opposed to Jesse, and he also liked reading Shakespeare, and they say he would take Shakespeare, copies of works of Shakespeare along with him in his saddlebags, like all the time. So, just want to give you a sense of who this guy is, and then give you a sense of this place. So, I suppose that's enough windbagging out of me, and let's check out the old footage. Alright everybody, here we are, Catfish Franklin, and we are at the grave site of famed outlaw Frank James. Check it out. All right, well, how about that? What a strange place, you know. They're in the middle of a public park. Interesting place. Yeah, I don't know. The day I went there, it was very quiet, kind of windy, sort of peaceful, really. But one thing I did want to say is just to kind of give the timeline of this. You know, Frank James dies in 1915, and he probably knew these people. You know, he married into the family, basically, as far as we know. They were nearby in Missouri. He probably hung out there. They probably helped him when he was an outlaw, so he probably hung out. He probably hung out at that place, and he probably even sat around in that graveyard a time or two. But so he dies in 1915. Then in 1927, you know, when he died, that land was still their land. Then in 1927, it gets donated to the city. Then in 1944, when Ann Ralston passes away, he finally gets buried there. And he probably had no idea that would happen. He's in a public park now. In fact, they just, I'm told, put in a new skating installation on the other side of the park there. So that's just interesting how things end up there. But I also just wanted to point out, I can't remember if I said this already, but on that plaque you'll notice the name of Harry S. Truman. So that's another interesting bit of history tie-in there for when that park was dedicated in 1927. And Ann Ralston was still alive then. So anyway, I hope you liked that. I thought it was very interesting. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.